A stranger pointed straight at me across our first anniversary table and said, "Your wife is carrying my baby." For 1 second, the whole conservatory went silent. Candles were burning. My husband was standing with a glass in his hand. My ultrasound photo was folded inside my bag, because in less than 5 minutes we had been about to tell both families that I was 3 months pregnant with our first child. Instead, a man I had never seen in my life walked into the glass conservatory behind my husband's family home, stopped in the middle of the room, lifted his arm toward me, and dropped one sentence that turned every face in that room into a weapon. "Your wife is carrying my baby." No one moved at first, then everyone moved at once. My mother-in-law stood so fast her chair scraped across the stone floor. My father-in-law went pale, then hard. One of my husband's cousins grabbed her phone like she was about to record the scandal she had always wanted to see. Someone at the far end of the table whispered, "Oh my God." Another voice said I knew something was off. I was still sitting there with one hand over my stomach. I had not even told them the baby was real yet. That stranger knew exactly where to stand, exactly when to speak, and exactly how long to pause after the accusation. He did not sound like a desperate man blurting out pain. He sounded rehearsed, clean, placed. He took one more step toward the table and looked at my husband. "I did not come here to ruin your night," he said. "I came because that child deserves the truth." I stood up so fast my chair tipped behind me. "I do not know you," I said. "I have never seen you before." He barely looked at me. That was the first thing that chilled me. He was not fighting with me. He was performing for the room. Then he slid a thick envelope onto the table. Photos came first. Grainy from a distance, convincing at a glance. A woman who looked like me, leaving what looked like a hotel. A blurred side profile in a parking lot. A close shot of a hand on a shoulder. Then papers. Medical printouts. Dates. Lab language. A timeline somebody had built to make my pregnancy look like the product of a secret affair. My husband's aunt grabbed the top page before I could touch it. "The dates match," she said. My mother-in-law did not ask who the man was. She did not ask why he had waited until this exact minute. She looked straight at me and said the words she had probably wanted to say since the day her son married me. "I knew you would disgrace this family." Then she turned to Ethan. "Divorce her. Now." If you were me in that moment, would you have begged them to listen or stayed still long enough to see who wanted you buried first? I wish I could tell you someone in that family stood up and said maybe we should hear Ava first. I wish I could tell you the room suddenly found its conscience. That is not what happened. What happened was uglier than that, and that is why I remember every second of it. My name is Ava Bennett Vale. I was 30 years old that night. I had been married to Ethan Vale for 1 year, and I had spent almost every day of that year learning the difference between being tolerated and being welcomed. I came from a family that knew how to stretch one paycheck across 2 emergencies. My mother worked reception at a dental office for 20 years. My father repaired commercial kitchen equipment until his back gave out. We were not polished, but we were honest. We showed up on time. We paid what we owed. We did not make people feel small to prove we were big. The Vales were old money, in the kind of way that made everyone around them speak half a step softer. Real estate, private investments, a foundation with their last name carved into a stone building downtown. Ethan was the eldest son, the one everyone assumed would someday keep the machine running. Then he married me. At first his family hid their disgust behind manners. Celeste smiled in the way women smile when they are already rewriting the story of your life in their head. Richard was polite but formal, like I was a temporary guest who had somehow drifted into family photos. The cousins were worse because they did not bother pretending for long. They asked where I had gone to school in that falsely casual tone rich people use when they are really asking what room you belong in. I learned fast. I learned which glass to reach for. I learned which donor names to remember. I learned how to stand inside rooms built to remind women like me that we were not born for them. I did all of that because I loved Ethan and because when it was just the 2 of us he never made me feel like I needed permission to breathe in his world. But Celeste never stopped treating me like an administrative error. When Ethan proposed, she asked him twice if he understood the difference between love and rescue. At our rehearsal dinner, she leaned across the table and told me marriage into a family like theirs required discretion and adaptability. What she meant was obedience. She just preferred expensive words. By the time our first anniversary came around, I had stopped expecting warmth from her. I had settled for peace. And for a few soft hours that night, peace was exactly what I thought I had. The conservatory behind the Vale house was all glass and gold light. Flowers curled around the iron columns. The table stretched nearly from one wall to the other. Ethan had chosen the menu himself. He kissed my temple before the guests arrived and told me to keep my hand on my bag because after his toast, he wanted to see everyone's face when I showed them the ultrasound photo. For one stupid, beautiful hour. I thought the memory of that night would belong to us. Then the stranger walked in and set it on fire. His name we later learned was Nolan Pierce. But he introduced himself only after the room had already started turning against me. "My name is Nolan Pierce," he said. I did not want to do this in public, but she left me no choice. You are lying, I said. He ignored me again and addressed Ethan. I have been trying to reach her for weeks. She knew I would come if she kept me away from the truth. One of Ethan's cousins pushed the papers farther down the table so the others could see them. Someone held up one of the photos. I saw my own face in profile blurred from the side, and something about the angle made my stomach turn, not because it looked true, because it looked built. My mother-in-law came around the table and stopped 2 feet from me. You trapped my son with this marriage, she said. Did you really think you could do the same thing with another man's child? I could barely hear my own voice when I answered. I have never met him. Richard stood then. He was not loud. Men like him do not need volume. They use calm the way other people use force. This ends tonight, he said. Then Ethan moved. Every person in that room expected him to move toward me for one reason or another, to defend me, to accuse me, to demand answers, to drag me out. I could feel the whole room leaning toward the shape they thought my humiliation should take. Instead, he turned away from all of us and walked to the audio console near the caterer's station. He picked up a microphone. Nobody leaves, he said. The room went silent again. One of the security men at the entrance looked toward Richard for direction. Ethan did not wait. Lock the side doors, he said. Keep every camera running. Every second. My mother-in-law stared at him. Ethan, she said. He raised one hand without even looking at her. Then he turned to Nolan. Say it again, he said. Slowly. On record. If you came into my home to accuse my wife, you can do it properly. That was the moment the room changed. Not because anyone suddenly believed me, because nobody had expected my husband to make the accusation bigger. My mother-in-law had ordered him to divorce me. Instead, he turned the whole thing into evidence. Nolan swallowed, but he repeated it. Your wife is carrying my baby. Ethan looked at him like a man memorizing a face for later. Then one of the papers finally slid close enough for me to reach. My hand was shaking when I picked it up. I was crying. I was humiliated. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it might bruise the baby. But I still did the one thing nobody else in that room had bothered to do. I read it. Before I married Ethan, I had worked in records operations for a private clinic network. Nothing glamorous. No white coat. No television drama title. I handled intake formatting audit flags, patient record routing, and cleanup after software transitions. It was the kind of job nobody noticed until something was wrong. And something was wrong. The footer on the page used an old formatting line from a software system that had been retired nearly a year earlier. The location of the verification strip was off. The form code belonged to an older export library. The date stamp looked close enough to fool a room full of angry relatives, but not close enough to survive scrutiny. Whoever built that document had seen real records before. They just had not seen enough of them. I lifted my eyes to Ethan. This file is fake, I said quietly. He crossed the room in 3 steps and crouched beside me. Are you sure? He asked. Sure enough, I whispered. Do not throw him out. Let him keep talking. He looked at me for 1 second longer, then stood. Nolan, he said, start from the beginning. What beginning? Nolan asked. The part where you say you know my wife, Ethan said. You walked into my anniversary dinner. You claim a child she has not even announced is yours. So start at the beginning and be specific. Nolan tried. He said we had met downtown months earlier. He said I had told him my marriage was unhappy. He said the relationship had continued in secret after the wedding. He said he had kept silent out of respect until he learned I was pregnant. He had a story. That was all it was. A story. I wiped my face and stood up. Where did we meet? I asked. He blinked. Downtown, he said. At a bar. Which bar? He hesitated. I do not remember the name. You do not remember the name of the place where you started an affair with a married woman carrying your child. He shifted. It was months ago. Which doctor signed that report? I asked, lifting the page. He looked at the paper like he had not expected to be tested on it. I do not remember. That is strange, I said. You remember my body. You remember my child. You remember enough to interrupt my anniversary dinner, but you do not remember the doctor's name on the proof you brought. My mother-in-law cut in before he could answer. Stop twisting this, she snapped. No guilty woman sounds more innocent than one cornered in public. That was when one of Ethan's uncles, who had been drinking enough to forget caution, muttered under his breath. If that baby is recognized, everything changes. The room went still for a different reason. Celeste shot him such a sharp look that he shut his mouth immediately. I did not know what everything meant yet, but I knew this much. That sentence did not belong to a family reacting to a scandal. It belonged to a family afraid of a consequence. Ethan heard it too. His face did not change, but something inside it closed. He walked back to me, took the fake report from my hand and slid his fingers around mine in front of everyone. I know my wife, he said. My mother-in-law took a step forward. If you walk out with her, do not come back. He did not even glance at her. We are done here, he said. Not with this, with how all of you wanted this to end. Then he led me out. No dramatic speech. No slammed glass. No final warning. just his hand around mine, while my mother-in-law's voice chased us through the conservatory, and the whole family watched us leave with the story unfinished. In the car, I finally broke. I bent forward with both hands over my face and cried in a way I had been too proud to cry in front of them. Ethan let me cry for almost a minute before he said my name. Ava. I lowered my hands. I am not asking you to believe me because you love me, I said. I am asking you to look at the file. He turned on the overhead light. I showed him the footer, the verification strip, the form code, the export formatting. This template was retired after a system transition, I said. That lab does not generate patient result sheets like this anymore. The page is built to look official from 6 feet away. Up close it falls apart. He looked from the paper to me. So they forged it. Yes. They did not just accuse me. They prepared for me. He leaned back in the seat and stared through the windshield for several long seconds. Then he said the sentence that told me he had shifted out of shock and into war. We are going to know every hand that touched this. When the people trying to destroy you leave one tiny crack in the lie, do you split it open at once, or stay quiet long enough to watch who keeps building on it? If you like smart revenge stories where one wrong detail can bring an entire setup down, subscribe now, and stay with me because that fake report was only the first crack. Ethan did not take me back to the Vale house that night. He took me to an apartment he kept for work near the city, the one place his family could not walk into uninvited. By morning he had done 3 things. First, he called an attorney who had never worked for his parents. Second, he sent the report to a document authentication consultant with a compliance background. Third, he used a private administrator connection I still knew from my years in clinic operations to verify whether the medical network named on the report had ever issued a page like that. By noon, we had our first answer. The clinic had no patient record matching the page Nolan carried into our anniversary dinner. By early afternoon, we had the second. The consultant confirmed the template had been built from outdated formatting and stitched to look legitimate at a glance. By evening, we had the third. The PDF metadata showed the file had been built on a corporate license system tied to a Vale Holdings device pool. It had taken money. It had taken access. It had taken planning. Ethan stared at the findings for so long, I finally asked what he was thinking. I knew my mother wanted you gone, he said. I did not know she wanted our child stained before anyone even knew the child existed. That line stayed with me. Our child stained. Not just me. The baby too. That was when the half sentence from the conservatory came back to me. If that baby is recognized, everything changes. Ethan heard me repeat it out loud. Recognized how I asked. He did not answer right away. He got up, opened a locked file drawer in the desk, and pulled out an old leather folder. I had seen the folder before, but never opened it. It held estate documents from his grandfather, the one person in that family who had always been kind to me without making a show of it. Inside was a trust structure I had never seen in full. The Vale Family Foundation and investment holdings were not controlled by one clean line of inheritance. There were branches, protections, conditions, and educational voting provisions designed to keep certain assets from being swallowed by whoever happened to be running the family in a given decade. Ethan found a marked clause and handed it to me. Upon the birth of the first legitimate child of the eldest son, a protected branch allocation shall separate from the current family administrative control and move into an independent education and succession trust with governance. Protections attached to the legal parents. I read it twice. Then I looked up. Your mother controls the current administrative block, I said. Most of it, Ethan said. And if our baby is publicly disputed before the pregnancy is even announced, the new branch gets delayed, challenged, maybe forced into review, he said. At minimum, it creates room for control to stay where it is. He did not need to finish the thought. Celeste had not only wanted me out of the marriage, she had wanted my child weak on paper before my child ever reached the paper. The next piece came through Marissa Cole. Marissa had been Celeste's executive assistant for 6 years, which in practice meant she was less assistant than shadow. She knew schedules, guest lists, legal names, dinner seating, calendar gaps, even what flowers appeared in which room before which fundraiser. If anyone could have fed Nolan the timing of our announcement and the exact minute Ethan would stand for a toast, it was Marissa. That was when Ethan hired a private investigator. Within 2 days, the investigator found Nolan photographed him meeting Marissa twice near the Vale Holdings offices and tied his movements to the exact stretch of days leading up to our anniversary dinner. Then Ethan's outside counsel moved fast. Instead of chasing private carrier records nobody could legally touch, he had Vale Holdings preserve the internal business logs from Marissa's office line and company VoIP account. Those office records showed 7 contacts with Nolan's number over 10 days. A transfer hit Nolan through a consulting shell 2 days before the anniversary dinner, then a second transfer cleared the morning after. That was the first moment the whole structure stopped looking like family suspicion and started looking like operational sabotage. By the time Nolan was brought into a conference room 3 days later, there was already a spread of paper on the table in front of him. The clinic denial, the authentication findings, the metadata report, the investigator's photographs of Nolan meeting Marissa, the preserved business call logs from Marissa's office line, the transfer records, and a draft complaint that would have turned his little performance into several very real problems. He tried to act offended at first. "I told the truth," he said. Our attorney pushed the clinic response across the table. "No," he said calmly. "You carried forged medical material into a private event and made a knowingly false paternity claim against a married pregnant woman." Nolan stopped looking at Ethan and started looking for exits. "I only showed what I was given," he said. "By who?" He did not answer. Ethan still had not raised his voice once. I watched that matter more to Nolan than yelling would have. Silence from a furious man is heavier than noise. I placed the fake report in front of him. "The person who built this had access to an old medical template," I said. "Not enough to build it right, but enough to pretend. The person who hired you knew the room, the timing, my husband's family, and the one sentence most likely to stain a baby before it even had a name in public. You were not clever. You were fed." He looked at me then, at Ethan, then down. "It was Marissa first," he said finally. "I only dealt with her. Then I was told Mrs. Vale knew everything." There it was. Not a dramatic confession, not a sobbing collapse, just the ugly truth pushed out because the lie had become too expensive to hold. He admitted he had never met me before the conservatory. The photos were provided. The report was provided. The line, "Your wife is carrying my baby," had been chosen because it would hit Ethan first and stain me second. He was told the family would do the rest. He was right about that part. By the time we left the conference room, Ethan looked like a man who had walked into it with a family and walked out without one. He asked our attorney one question in the hall. "What is the cleanest way to put all of this in front of them at once?" The answer came in two parts. Document everything. Then give them the same thing they gave us, an audience. 2 nights later, Ethan called his parents and said he wanted a private family meeting, not a legal meeting, not a public confrontation. A family meeting. Celeste agreed too quickly. That told me she still believed the story could be dragged back under her control if she got Ethan in a room without outsiders. She did not know our attorney would be in the next room. She did not know Nolan had signed a statement. She did not know I had already selected the exact page from the trust document I wanted on the table when she finally stopped pretending this was about morality. On the drive there, Ethan asked if I was sure I wanted to be the one to start. The first time. "They wanted me crying and cornered," I said. "This time I want them seated and listening." He nodded once. "If your own family tried to stain your child before anyone even knew the child existed, would you expose them the second you could? Or wait until they were seated comfortable and absolutely sure they still controlled the room?" The library in the Vale house had always been Celeste's favorite room for family conversations because it made every conflict feel prejudged. Dark shelves, portraits, heavy curtains, a room built to remind everyone which name was on the walls. When we walked in, she was already seated beside Richard. I noticed 2 things immediately. First, she was dressed softly, almost maternally, like she wanted Ethan to remember her as a mother before she was forced to defend herself as an architect. Second, she did not look surprised to see me. She expected me to come as the emotional complication. She did not expect me to come as the first witness. Ethan did not sit. "No one interrupts Ava tonight," he said. Celeste gave a thin smile. "Her version, you mean?" "The truth," Ethan said. I stayed standing too. I looked at the same woman who had told her son to divorce me before asking me one question, and for the first time since I joined that family, I did not care whether I sounded agreeable in her house. "At our anniversary dinner," I said, "a stranger walked into your conservatory, pointed at me, and claimed my unborn baby was his. Before anyone asked who he was. Before anyone asked me a single question, you told your son to divorce me. You did not react like a shocked mother. You reacted like someone who had been waiting for a cue." Celeste exhaled through her nose. "You are being dramatic." Ethan slid a folder onto the table. "This is the response from the clinic named on the report," he said. "They never issued the document Nolan brought into our anniversary dinner." Richard reached for it. Ethan kept his hand on the page until his father looked up. "There is more," Ethan said. He laid out the authentication findings. The outdated template, the incorrect footer, the old export formatting, the digital trace tied to a Vale Holdings license system. "That is impossible," Richard said. "No," Ethan said. "It is internal." Celeste leaned back. "You are trying to tie one fake document to this family because you need someone to blame." Ethan laid out the investigator's photographs, the preserved office call logs, and the transfer records on top of the other file. Then he placed Marissa's name in the center of the table like a blade. My stomach did not tighten this time. It steadied. "Nolan Pierce did not find us," I said. "He was fed the room, the timing, the line, and the paperwork. He met with Marissa twice before our anniversary dinner. He was coached through her, and he was paid through a shell tied to your office operations." Celeste laughed once too short and too sharp. "You are not pinning criminal behavior on me because of an assistant." Ethan opened the signed statement. "Then explain why your assistant paid him after meeting with you." Richard went silent, not stunned. Calculating. Celeste changed tactics the way women like her always do when authority fails and innocence is out of reach. Everything I did was for this family, she said. For you. That was when Ethan took out the trust page. No, he said. This was for control. He read the clause aloud. Not the whole page, just the part that mattered. The first legitimate child of the eldest son. Protected branch allocation. Independent governance. Legal parent protections. When he finished, I spoke before Celeste could turn it into a speech about stewardship. You were not trying to remove me from a marriage, I said. You were trying to make sure our child entered this family already disputed, already stained, already easier to push out of the line you could not stand to share. Celeste did not deny it quickly enough. That pause was her confession before the words came. I was protecting what your grandfather built, she said. Ethan looked at her with something worse than anger. No, he said. You were protecting what you could not bear to release. Richard finally spoke. You do not understand what happens to a family when structure breaks. Ethan turned to him. You mean control, he said. Not structure. Then he looked back at his mother. You did not protect me. You tried to destroy my wife in front of a room full of people, and you tried to strip my child before my child was even born. Celeste stood. Do not speak to me as if I attacked a child. I did not raise my voice. You did, I said. You just chose paperwork and witnesses instead of your hands. The room went still. She looked at me as if she had only just realized that the girl she had dismissed as a social inconvenience had understood the machinery from the beginning. I stepped closer to the table and placed my palm over the trust page. You tried to take my child's name before my child even had one, I said. The worst part is, you thought I would be too broken to read the paper you used to do it. For the first time since I had known her, Celeste had no graceful reply. She had explanations. She had posture. She had outrage. She did not have a reply. Ethan set both hands on the back of an empty chair and spoke so calmly it made every word land harder. From this point forward, you do not get access to my wife or my child, he said. Any communication comes through counsel. Any attempt to contact Ava directly will be documented. Any attempt to interfere with this pregnancy, this child, or our legal position will be answered formally and without warning. Celeste stared at him. You would cut off your own mother. He did not answer the question she asked. He answered the one she had created. I am cutting off the people who tried to destroy my family, he said. Then he walked to my side. Not ahead of me, beside me. That mattered more than it sounds, because at the anniversary dinner he had chosen me in shock. Here he chose me in full knowledge. As we reached the door, Richard called his name once. Ethan stopped, but did not turn all the way back. There are some mistakes a family survives, Richard said. Ethan finally looked over his shoulder. Not this one. Then we left. Outside, the air was cold enough to clear the room from my lungs. The same family that had once made me feel like a trespasser in their world had just watched me walk out as the one person who had read their setup correctly from the inside. I put my hand over my stomach. For days, that had been the center of the attack. The shame they wanted to spread, the leverage they wanted to poison, the future they wanted weakened before it even had a public name. Instead, it became the line they could not cross and recover from. They aimed at me. They just forgot I knew how to read what they used to shoot. If you like smart revenge, where paperwork hits harder than shouting, subscribe and stay with me for the next one.